Hello and welcome to the channel. Folks, are you new to the Total War series? Is Total War Warhammer 3 your first time to pick it up? This game has been offered on Xbox Games Pass, and it's still on Steam, and it's over in the Epic Game Store, so there may be many of you who do not have experience in Total War Warhammer 3. My name's the HeirofCarthage. I've been running a Total War YouTube channel for well over a decade, and I have been playing Total War since the very first entry of Total War Shogun. Way back in, I think, 2000 or 2001. It's a long time ago. Now, I am not perfect at this game. I'm not like the world's best player, but I do have a very sound understanding of this game and thousands of hours under my belt. And today, I wanted to bring you a video to help you out if you are a newcomer, so you know how to get settled in to the new game that you have purchased or that you're playing through Games Pass. So let's get things started. Here's 5 tips that will help you out as a beginner. So this first one is going to seem really dumb, but play that Prologue Campaign. People, don't be too proud. The Prologue Campaign is going to teach you the very, very important basics of how to move an army on the battle map, how to control the campaign map, how the turn-based campaign works versus the real-time strategy battles. You need to play this campaign. It's really neat that they have a Prologue Campaign. This isn't something that's available in every Total War game. They had very small ones in Total War Warhammer 2. So again, if you are new to the game, you know what? Even if you're a returning player, there's a lot of new features in Total War Warhammer 2. Warhammer 3. You should come check it out and play the Lost God campaign. It's pretty cool. It's got a neat story behind it that also introduces the narrative for the main campaign. Like I said, it kind of walks you step by step through some of the most basic button controls and turn-ending sequences and finances and all the things you're going to need to know to get a campaign running. So that is tip number 1. May seem obvious, but start here. Okay, number 2. Let's jump into this one. You've completed the Prologue Campaign. You feel like you maybe have your feet under you just enough that you want to jump into that great single-player gameplay that so many people enjoy in the Total War series. Where do you start? There's 8 options here on the page. Which one should you pick first? Are some of them harder than others? Are others easier to understand? And the answer is yes. Some of these are much easier than others, and some are where you should start. Now, you'll see Creative Assembly, who designed the game, Creative Assembly, designing the game, they recommend Kislev and Demons of Chaos as a first campaign. I actually recommend neither of those. So if you want my advice, come over here to Grand Cathay, select them, and pick the Iron Dragon. If you look at the map, the Iron Dragon starts off on the east end of the map and has a relatively safe and stable starting position. Cathay has relatively easy access to money because of their caravan features, and the Iron Dragon has plenty of allies around while still having some enemies to help get you settled into your first campaign and get your feet under you. The Iron Dragon will give you that safe starting position you need to start gaining a more sound understanding of the game and to practice the skills that you learned in the Prologue Campaign. So he is number 1 for my recommendation for you to have a first campaign. While we're here, let me throw another tip at you for free in the mix here while I'm telling you which factions are best. As far as difficulty goes, it's actually explained here in some nice tool tips, but I'll walk through it with you to make sure you understand. Normal and normal is where the game is basically balanced. There's not going to be any excess cheating for the AI when the campaign difficulty is on normal, and the same goes true for battle when the battle difficulty is on normal. As you turn these up, and let's talk about campaign first, the AI is going to pay less upkeep. They're going to get extra unit recruitment. They are going to be significantly cheating. And when you put it on very hard, even more so. And when you go to legendary, it's even crazier, and you can't even save the game manually. So these harder difficulties here are for an experienced Total War player who's really looking for a challenging grind against a relentless AI, okay? If you are a very, very new player, don't be afraid to play on easy. It's okay. It's gonna help you out a lot. This one actually gives the player some benefits. If you don't need either of those things, put the difficulty on normal and start from there. You can actually increase the difficulty while you're in the campaign. Don't let people make you feel bad. Pick the one that's right for you, okay? You don't have to be out there peacocking trying to show everybody that you can beat the game on Legendary to have a good time. Now, you might be saying, I don't want to play as Cathay as a first campaign. Is there anybody else who makes for a good first campaign? And I would say yes. I think another fairly easy first campaign to get into is indeed the one that CA recommends with the Demon Prince. It's not as easy as Cathay, but it's pretty good. You get to customize your own demon prints. It's like a build your own demon Barbie, if you will. You get to pick all of their, body parts and other stuff that give them different things. It makes it a lot of fun. You get a lot of strong demon units. You can mix the 4 different Chaos Factions demon units. It's very powerful. Money's not too hard to come by. There's plenty of enemies that are ripe for you to take. So again, this would also be a good starting campaign if you're looking for one that is a bit of a learner. So there you go. That is tip number 2, who to play as first. So let's get started with tip number 3. So here we are on the battle map where we are going to need to explain this to you, and you have your forces. You've gone through the prologue. You understand the basic WASD controls, Q and E for rotation, Z and X for camera up and down, or you can use your mouse scroll. You can push the middle mouse button to help pan your camera as well. You figured out all these basics. You know your unit cards down here, and you want to learn a little bit more interesting stuff for how to, maybe position your army and give movement orders and other things. So you can hold the left click and you can drag boxes around larger numbers of units, and then you can hold the right click and drag these units out into formation. You can actually see that AI actually puts them into a somewhat sensible formation right off the bat. If you don't like any of these formations, there are others to choose from. Melee front, missile front. So you can do things like this, or like I said, you can just right click and drag. See what the AI gives you. They're giving you different options here. You can also position units yourself. So let's say that I want my armored line up front. And you'll notice that I just used another trick there. If you select a unit with the left click and then hold shift and go to the end of where you want to select and left click again, you can pick all the units in between. I can then right click and drag those units into a formation. And let's say that I want my guns and bows in a second line. Sorry, I'm pushing all kinds of wrong buttons here. All right, so let's say that I want my guns and bows in the second line, so let's get those. You can actually left click and drag unit cards. Again, I'm gonna use my little shift trick there, and I'm gonna put these in behind my armored units. So now I've got them in a second line. My armored units got messed up because all the stuff I was clicking, so they're in a front line. Let's say I want my cavalry on the flanks, ready to strike with its speed. So I put cavalry on the flanks, and then I've got my artillery here, Little Grom, as he is affectionately known. And there's Little Grom sitting right in the middle. And this is the formation I want. Let's say that I want to move this army in formation during battle. Well, you have a couple of options here. I can select all of them like this, and I can push Control and G, and you'll see that I have a locked group. And now when I right click and drag, the army will move in formation. Another cool thing is if I double click an attack order, the army will pick the unit that's closest in front of them and attack. And you'll notice that I have a missile cursor here because some of my units are missile units. I'm gonna slow it down. If you want to make everybody melee, you can hold the Alt key down, and that switches it to a sword, and you can immediately go into melee without having to click any other buttons. Now there's a couple of other features I want to show you here. You can give units a drawn out path. Let's say that I take these 2 cavalry units and I want them to move one of them straight at the toads and one to outflank it. Again, let's go into slow motion here. I'll select my first unit of cavalry, double right click an attack order. They're going to charge, and I want this unit to outflank. If I hold the shift key and then right click and draw a path, I can take this unit and they will start to path themselves around. This is a very useful option when it comes to trying to outflank enemies. Now you can always adjust. You can see this unit is actually trying to work further around my flank, so I'll draw a new path out and around them. So this will essentially give me the opportunity to lower my micromanagement. I can have one unit charging, I can have another unit making its way around the flank. So that's some kind of advanced move options that you can try out if you want to whenever you get onto the battle map. Don't be afraid to sometimes play the game in slow motion like I am right now, just to get yourself familiarized with it. All my units got a melee attack, so that's why they're just running forward like crazy right now. But in any case, yeah, that's tip number 3. Let's move on to another one. For tip number 4, I'm back on the battle map, and I'm going to teach you a little tactic I like to call Blob Baiting. It is a very cool way to get a ton of kills, and maybe a bit cheesy, but it will help you whenever you are vastly outnumbered by enemy troops in Total War Warhammer 3, and you want to get as many kills as possible, maybe sometimes even win some battles that look like they are completely unwinnable. Some of the best units to use for the blob baiting tactic are going to be single entity monsters. That means rather than having a unit with a bunch of little entities like these blue horrors, I have a single entity monster or a unit like this Soul Grinder. You can send them into combat by themselves even sometimes, which we're going to do here. And then behind them, you'll have missile units, and you're going to essentially use your single entity to block one or multiple units, and then unleash a just withering missile barrage, followed up with magic. And the type of magic you're looking for is going to either be bombardments, vortexes, or breath spells. So like Pendulum here, Tzeentch's Firestorm. These are going to be the kind of things that you're looking for. So let me give you a bit of a demonstration here. Let's start off with Tzeentch's Firestorm. I'm going to take these two Soul Grinders, and I'm just going to go plowing headlong into the middle of the line, and I'm going to take my Lord in there too, and this may seem absolutely suicidal, and if you don't do it right, I guess it could be. I'm going to move these blue horrors forward. I'm going to leave it in slow motion so you can kind of see this unplay properly. Well, I'll put it back in there when we get to the right moment. First, you charge. You got to draw in as many enemy units into the blob as you can, so you want to give them something nice and tempting. Like my Lord here, Kairos Fate Weaver. Look at this. AI's like, hey, look at this moron, just charging his troops straight in. You'll notice that I kept my blue horrors here. They're about to open fire, so they're going to start getting a bunch of damage done in this blob. And then look at this. This is a blob here, and there's another one forming right here. This is what you are looking for. So single entity monsters don't tank a lot of damage from vortex and breath spells and stuff like that. So I'm going to drop this vortex right here. This is Tzeentch's Firestorm. This one moves around like crazy, so you'll want to put it in the dead center. Usually with these spells, and then let it expand, but just let's watch the damage that this does, okay? It's gonna be pretty entertaining. Here goes Tzeentch's Firestorm. It's got a 5-second wind up. Go ahead and hit play. Just watch the carnage unfold. Now this is one of the more powerful vortex spells, so this one will be particularly entertaining. But watch those units' life bars just absolutely drain. They got blob baited. They are suckers, chumps, losers. And you just made them pay a massive price for stepping in front of you. Now you can also use breath spells like Penumbral Pendulum. These you want to line up across a shape, and you can hold the Alt key and then move your mouse around, and you can aim where it's going. So in this case, you can see the breath's going to travel in the direction here. I'm going to make it travel, and again, because they blob baited, watch the damage that I can stack up on them. See how much damage we did to those units? Just using a couple of spells and some single entities, I was able to draw in and do tremendous damage to the army of Nurgle with just a few units. See how that can be very useful. Now, I'm not going to sit here and play this one in its entirety. I'm using this as an example. Don't be afraid to do something a little bit cheesy, like some blob baiting like this. It's a great way to dish out tremendous damage to your enemies, and just have a better backup, obviously, than I demonstrated here. Have your missiles standing by, get that blob. Sometimes you have to fall back and retreat and do it more than once, but blob baiting is a great way to win you some big battles. And the final tip that I want to give you today is talking a little bit about unit stats and how to understand them, because this is going to make you a better player at Total War Warhammer 3, understanding the unit stat system. There are some type of rock, paper, scissors engagements that you will see in the Total War world, like spears typically beat horses or other large, creatures, whether it's, historical games or these games. Your swords and axes typically do better against infantry than spears. You have missiles, which tend to do good against infantry and large targets, but terrible against cavalry when they get into melee. So yes, there is a bit of rock, paper, scissoring going on, but it's also quite a bit more complicated than that in the Total War world. It's not quite as simple as, say, in like an Age of Empires game, where the rock, paper, scissors is very strong, and it rotates all around that. So there are some differences, and I want to talk through unit stats, because then you'll be able to look at the unit stats and better understand what it is that your unit is capable of, and thus make better decisions in the battles and win more battles. So, without any further ado here, let's go through each stat. Armor is how resistant your unit is to missile fire and melee attacks, as it says in the tooltip. And the more armor a unit has, the better it is going to resist those attacks. We'll talk about damage because it is tied to weapon strength and missile strength in terms of how well it's going to resist. Now, a low armor rating would be anywhere from 0 to 30, 40. 50 to, say, 70 or 80 is mid-tier, and above 80 is high. Just to give you an idea on where this stat stands and what would be low, medium, and high. Essentially, armor is a way for your unit to shrug off non-armor piercing damage. May not make sense to you, but we're going to cover the damage types. So that's what armor is. It's like a defense built in. Leadership, or sorry, we should have started all the way up at the top here. We got hit points, and there's a blue line up there too, which is the barrier, and we'll talk about it. It really only applies to Tzeentch as a faction, but hit points are spread out across all the entities in a unit. So in the case of this blue horror unit, you can see right here that it is 120 entities, and it even tells you about their mass there too, because mass has an impact on collisions. So you can see these guys only have 70 mass, whereas if we pick the Soul Grinder, it's got 4,000 mass because it's much heavier. So it gives you an idea about the mass of each entity. All right, so now let's take a look at the math here, and I'll show you how this works. There are 5,760 hit points on this unit of blue horrors. We divide that by 120, which means that each entity has 48 hit points at their disposal. So those 48 hit points are how much damage they can take before an entity dies. So that's how hit points work. In the case of Tzeentch, though, they do have a barrier, which is rechargeable. It acts the same as hit points, except it always drains first if it's there, and once it's gone, then you start to take hit point damage. But again, that only applies to Tzeentch factions. Now let's move on to the next one, which is leadership. This represents the morale, essentially, of your unit, or how easy it is to convince your unit to stop fighting and turn tail and run. Leadership of 45, like in this case, is very low. I would say mid-tier is up from there, like 60 or so. 80, 90, 100 is really high. Some units are unbreakable as well, meaning that they will fight to the utter death. An example of that and how you can tell should be able to be found right here in the spawn. The spawn unit has the unit trait Unbreakable, and you can see its leadership sits all the way up at 100. So an unbreakable unit will never run away from combat, it will fight to the death. Otherwise, if a unit's leadership gets to 0 or lower, there is a chance that unit will turn tail and begin routing and no longer be able to be controlled. That is what leadership is. Speed is pretty straightforward. It's how fast your unit moves. Anything in the 20s and 30s is low. I would say 40s, 50s, 60s is mid-tier. 70 and above, or 100 plus, like so 70 and above is fast, 100 plus is very fast. So speed is very important for a unit. Take a look at that speed, you'll get an idea of how it's going to stack in. Melee attack is basically like a chance to hit. It's like rolling the dice and rolling a high number. So the higher this number, the better the chance that you're going to score a hit on the enemy. So in this case, 20 is a very low melee attack. High would be up in the 70s or 80s. Sometimes you can see it up closer to 100, which means that basically every time you swing, you're going to land a hit. That is what melee attack is. Next to melee attack, you may see some special characters. Take a look at those. It tells you if there's anything special. In this case, there are flaming attacks, which do specific damage to units that are vulnerable to fire, and there are magical attacks, which can bypass things that are normally resistant to, say, just a physical attack. So these special characteristics will be shown next to melee attack, and it means that applies whenever they're hitting in melee, not at range. We then have a melee defense stat, and again, this is the chance of your unit being hit. It's similar to melee attack, but this is on the flip side, on defense. So the higher this number it is, the much harder it gets for a unit to land a hit on you. Units that have very high defense, like 60, 70, 80, they are near untouchable by anything that has a really low melee attack like this. When it'd be extremely difficult for them to land that. So the higher the melee defense, the more survivable your unit's going to be in melee. Weapon strength is a measure of how hard the unit hits when it does score a hit through that melee attack, and then it's broken up into two components. You see here base weapon damage and armor piercing weapon damage. Base weapon damage is just that, it's base. However, base weapon damage has to go up against the armor applied too, and some of that base weapon damage will be deflected by the armor. However, armor piercing damage goes through the armor and is applied, no matter how much armor an enemy unit has. So if a unit has very high armor piercing weapon damage component, it's usually indicated. Let's take a look at an example like this Exalted Lord of Change. If I pick that unit and pin it here, you can see this little armor piercing icon meaning that most of their weapon strength is indeed armor piercing. It means that these units are particularly good against highly armored targets. So weapon strength can be quite telling as to what your unit will be good at fighting against. Let's take another example. We take a look at these Screamers of Tzeentch. They have the armor piercing weapon strength, but they also have this thing called a bonus versus large. And when you look at that tooltip, you can see that that bonus versus large is 25. What that means is that they're going to get an extra bonus when they are fighting against a certain size target, a target that is indicated as large, like you see right here on the Screamers of Tzeentch themselves. So there's little things you can watch for here in terms of helping you better understand your weapon strength, but essentially this determines the amount of damage that will be done to an opponent if you score a hit. Then you have charge bonus. The charge bonus is a special bonus that is applied to both melee attack and weapon strength for a short period. I believe it lasts for 10 seconds or less, and it's exponential. It starts off at the very top and then falls off exponentially, meaning that over the course of the next 10 seconds or so, that charge bonus drops off quickly. But what that means is that if I were to charge with this particular unit, the Screamers, they're going to get an augment of an extra 22 melee attack and 22 weapon strength for a short period of time after they come in on the charge. So units that have a higher charge bonus thrive on hitting hard early. So make sure that they get a clean charge bonus. There you go, folks. That is a brief talk through of all the unit statistics. As you look at these, it will give you a better idea of how you can use them to your benefit. I hope this video was useful to folks who are new to the game. I know that it can be quite overwhelming. I'll tell you what, get down in the comments, ask me some questions. What other things are you wondering about if you're a new player? And I will make a second and follow-up video and try to answer some of those questions. So welcome to Total War Warhammer 3. We're glad to have you in the Total War community, and I hope you come back with some questions, and I look forward to helping you more. HeirofCarthage signing out for now. Hope to see you on the battlefields out there.